Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Hey, Robin. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Great stuff. Now, we're going to talk about digital inclusion. How important it is. We're both disabled, we're both visually impaired, and know firsthand how important digital inclusion is, inclusive design. We wouldn't be where we are today, personally, ourselves and disabled people across the world, if it wasn't for the technology, much of which is inclusive out of the box these days. But that's no good if what you're accessing online, on websites, mobile apps, etc., aren't inclusive. And, I don't know about you, but for me, capture those distorted images that you absolutely have to crack if you want to be able to sign up for a particular service or whatever. The audio version, a nightmare. Is something that instantly pops into my head as kind of keeping me awake at night. And when it's inclusive, it's a dream. So I wish I could literally buy everything that I need from Amazon because it just works for me and it's nice and easy and accessible. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. Everything you said, Robin. I think accessibility is so important on a personal perspective, and it's so important professionally as well. As an accessibility leader of Barclays, I'm kind of lifted up and shrunk back down on a daily basis when I see, when we get accessibility right and when there's room for improvement. And I think we know the kind of business advantage, which this sort of panel coming into is all about, that there's a multitude of benefits for why accessibility is good, right? Why organizations should start doing stuff around accessibility and why they should continue to kind of champion for accessibility. And I know you wanted to sort of have a chat about what some of these benefits are, right? And sort of sprinkle some examples to bring this to life for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So these numbers, we've got a few juicy ones, are really about making the decision makers, the budget holders, maybe your board of trustees, or even your investors really sit up and listen. So these are the carrots of the business advantage that inclusive design brings you. But we'll definitely look at other areas later on. But yeah, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess the short story, why accessibility matters, commercial benefit, legal requirement, right thing to do. So let's take the business benefit front. So if I'm the accessibility lead of Barclays, of a bank, um, you know, folks usually talk about that, 1.3 billion people globally with a disability, the $8 trillion spending power. We've just celebrated in the UK Purple Tuesday and focusing on the purple pound, which these are big numbers being bandied around. I think, that disabled consumers are often sort of overlooked and underserved, and they deserve better service. They deserve to be valued. And I think the incredible, fantastic, feisty firework that is Caroline Casey, talked about this at last Tech Show Pro, right? About that value of disabled people to businesses, to the economy, to society, when we really lean in and include and involve disabled people. The evidence is that, Accenture Research did some stuff that showed, companies that focus on recruiting, retaining disabled talent, when they raise their game on disability inclusion, they raise their profits, raise their bottom line. And I know at Barclays, right, we've seen this firsthand. When we launch accessible customer services like talking cash machines that helps people, customers with sight difficulties or print difficulties like dyslexia, we see customers vote with their feet and switch to our bank. Their families move to our bank because we're more welcoming, accommodating, and ultimately, we care. So, there's a really clear, compelling business reason why we do this. It's not charity or pity. It makes good business sense. And I think to your point, Robin, about the user experience, when we do accessibility well, we're able to reach more customers and have more happier customers. I mean, one example we've seen in Barclays, right, is when we redesigned our Barclays mobile banking app. So maybe 3 or 4 years back, the app had a number of accessibility issues. Things were difficult for disabled customers to do. It would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to retrofix. And by involving accessibility experts like AbilityNet, by involving real-world disabled people, by considering accessibility as a pillar right from the start, we redesigned that app. And when we launched it, it did all the same things as before, but it was technically accessible to folks who needed it, but it was more usable and simple for everyone else. We saw App Star ratings go from 2 stars out of 5 to 4.5 stars out of 5. And again, the costs were sort of a fraction of what they would have been by thinking about accessibility from the start. So I think it's about, really doing accessibility well can really save time and cost and effort sort of downstream. So those are some of the points around the sort of business benefit. And maybe on that point about spending, we're all sort of at home, and online shopping so much more important. And I think we've both seen, Robin, we were talking about this earlier, the click away pound numbers. I think it's
Yeah.
is it 7 in 10 sort of disabled online shoppers, if they encounter barriers online, they go somewhere else. Like, you and I spend crazy amounts on Amazon because it's familiar and we know it's accessible, and we're prepared to pay a little bit more because it's not really worth our while going sort of elsewhere. And really that's, in short, what all the kind of click away pound numbers point to.
Absolutely. So 86% choose to pay more if the site is accessible. They will stick with that site. If the site is good, like I mentioned Amazon before, 83% will stick with that site. So they're more loyal, they'll pay more because they really appreciate the effort that you've put in. And as you say, if you do it in a timely way, so you don't have to retrofit, then it's not going to break the bank. And the revenue after the increase in inclusion, preferably getting disabled users involved as well, is absolutely massive. And when you bear in mind that, we're an aging population, disability gets more common in older age. By 2040, it's reckoned that 63 pence in every pound that is, spent by your customers will be, that's everyone's customers, not just Barclays, will be by people with disabilities. So that's absolutely massive. 50% of people, the research shows, will leave. They won't complete a process if they're having challenges with it. So yeah, the click away pound, it's massive and it's easily lost. So yeah, absolutely. As well as the compelling business case, the advantage that you will have to the bottom line, you have also got a legal requirement, arguably an ethical and moral requirement as well, obligation. But from a legal point of view, guys, if that's what ticks the box for your decision makers, then be aware it absolutely is a legal requirement. We've seen recent legislation applicable to the public sector really shifting the needle, and that's because for the very first time there's a named body that will monitor and enforce, i.e. fine, organizations in the public sector. So that's local authority, central government, even broadcasters like the BBC, universities, etc. They're all scrambling to do the right thing, and that's just such a massive change and a breath of fresh air. It has been a legal requirement forever, but finally we're seeing that really there's teeth to the legislation now. What about ESG, for example? For people that don't know, do you want to kind of fill people in, because we would be remiss not to flag that this is a really important aspect of why people should do the right thing.
Yeah, no, sure, Robin, and really excited about the legal points you make as well, of just being far clearer now. I guess on so let's talk about ESG, or so that's environmental, social, and governance. ESG, and this really ties up to sort of brand and reputation. And I think in my mind, we're clear at Barclays that the accessibility programs we run and what we offer, has really helped in terms of bolstering our brand. And ESG is kind of one way of how we can measure that. So, as a business, we publish financial statements that sort of show our profits, but we also publish around of a non-financial impact that we as a business are having. And that's around the kind of E, the environmental, so what we're doing around sort of green and climate change and so forth, around the social, so how businesses are backing, really driving societal change, so maybe around gender or around race, or increasingly around disability within that social aspect. And then the G, governance, is really around responsibly run businesses. So much as Barclays, we and many other big businesses will add in some of the work we do around accessibility and disability inclusion, form one element of that package of ESG reports. And it provides another way for us to tell the story of what we do in accessibility to investors and shareholders. And that's really getting more attention and importance. Because if you think, we've really seen a trend in recent months that investors, whether you're a person or a pension fund, really recognizing that, you know, they want to invest ethically, right, in things or businesses that share their values of what's important to them. So we also recognize, you know, that adding in disability inclusion and what we're working on there into this sort of ESG reporting is, you know, really important for us. And we see this this trend emerging of more and more businesses following suit. So, you know, I guess there's that on the brand and reputation. I think the final point I'd say, which is really linked to COVID, Robin, of when I look at this, it's kind of around accessibility programs are the biggest loyalty scheme that you've got. And when I think about brands and businesses that have done this well, you know, maybe, you know, Sainsbury's, if they prioritized online grocery shopping when COVID came in to, you know, shielding vulnerable people, or Waitrose launched an hour at the start of the day for older and vulnerable customers, you know, that's really important. That's so much better than any marketing sort of advertising campaign you could do, because that will really be remembered for a long time to come, right, by disabled, older, vulnerable people whose backs were sort of against the wall, so to speak. And, you know, these brands actually went out of their way and sort of had their back. So really important to sort of hit home that loyalty factor around accessibility. But, you know, I know accessibility is also good from the sort of fostering a diverse workforce. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So it works internally as well. You know, the loyalty that you'll get from employees who feel valued. And we absolutely know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the more diverse a workforce, the healthier the workforce is, the better services and products that they produce, because they are going to be more inclusive. You know, you don't want to have your products created by young white men who are, you know, in a privileged environment or whatever. So it's really, really important that you not only have a diverse workforce that you look after and provide the right reasonable adjustments for, but that you also make sure that your choices around the internal systems that you choose to use or have developed are inclusive too. And these are obviously equally as important as those that are customer facing, because it cuts both ways. You know, Barclays have experienced or enjoyed massive brand value from being an inclusive brand, from being very obviously, you know, prioritizing inclusion and accessibility, but it cuts both ways as well. So when push comes to shove with COVID, say, and you might have customers that are forced into online banking for the first time, or employees that are forced to work from home and there isn't the support from their colleagues around them to help with the gaps in accessible systems, they're now having to do it themselves. And so if obviously you've prioritized accessibility beforehand, you're good to go. But otherwise, you know, you really start crunching, don't you? Has that been an issue at all?
Yeah,
with working from home?
Absolutely, Robin. I mean, we know this theory that, you know, diverse disabled talent, so leaning on your workforce, we certainly see it that it helps kind of act as rocket fuel to propel our accessibility, you know, programs forward. We launch more accessible customer services, and therefore more disabled talent then apply for jobs with us. But I think now, particularly in COVID, we also recognise that there's some extra challenges that, you know, our workforce might face working from home, and a need to sort of move to, you know, more modern, more accessible platforms, you know, like Microsoft Teams, what Texture Pros run off, and kudos to Microsoft. I mean, one of the points when we think about workforce that we've done a lot of work on over this year, Robin, is really looking at tackling our internal systems, you know, which, you know, we've audited the top 80 internal systems and suppliers that we use within the bank. And we recognise this is a long-term issue, that these systems just really aren't as accessible as they should be. And I think what we found working with all those suppliers is, you know, a third of them were broadly accessible. You know, a third of them were a little bit below, were kind of amber, and a third of them were really not accessible. And that's quite startling, right? You know, 2/3 of internal systems not being accessible. So, you know, this, you know, massive journey to educate and encourage and uplift our suppliers, you know, producing supplier guides on accessibility. You can Google, and it's a real focus of ours But, to be clear, we have, now, started switching and selecting suppliers that, are accessible, to meet the needs of our, diverse workforce, right? So it's getting a real hot topic in that sense to us, and it's useful just to again make sure that we give it some airtime, as companies often don't really talk about what they're doing internally and the internal tools that their workforce have to use.
Absolutely, and it's obviously business critical for each individual, but also for the business as a whole, because that could really impact productivity. There may even be, issues with hiring, with retention, hugely expensive, compromise agreements, that sort of thing. Hiring and maintaining, retaining good talent is hard, and so you really do need to make sure that your internal systems are up to scratch. I can think within AbilityNet, two very recent choices for an internal HR platform and for a employee diversity surveying platform. We get regular surveys of well-being and satisfaction and that sort of thing. Have both been chosen based on accessibility, and neither were the sort of obvious market leading products because they just weren't cutting it. So yeah, this is big stuff. HSE, Health and Safety Executive, did some research, and they have shown that disabled employees are as productive as their able-bodied counterparts given the right adjustments. They stay longer in their jobs, and they are better at staying in work. Their sickness is down compared to their colleagues. So, they're more loyal, they're more productive because they haven't got as much sick leave, etc. So, that combined with the diversity that we talked about before, which just makes for a better environment, working environment, and better products and services, that, what is there not to like, basically? So just very quickly then, looking forward, what do you think prioritizing inclusion means for future platforms? We've seen a crisis this year which has really shown the flaws in some of the choices that people have made where it didn't prioritize accessibility. We've seen some of the advantages where a challenge like COVID allowed Microsoft to concertina a product development roadmap for teams that was spanning several years, right down into several months because of COVID, allowing them to prioritize that. Just imagine if within Barclays, in AbilityNet, in any organization, that we had that luxury of being able to really focus on doing things to help end users and making sure that inclusion was prioritized as well, where we could be in the future and what shape we would be in when the next crisis hits.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, well, we've certainly seen, Robin, but the accessibility work we've done already to make sure that, we give a great experience to a greater number of people using, our digital banking channels has really helped as COVID's come along for us to weather that storm. And I know, shameless plug, we've got a session, I think it's on 17th November, 2 p.m, which is really just drilling into this in a bit more detail. So rather than sort of unpacking it now when we're all sort of almost out of time, then, folks interested in understanding how banks and sort of customer services have been impacted by COVID and what financial services are doing, then I'd suggest kind of tune into that. But any sort of final thoughts, Robin, from you around the sort of future-proofing and looking ahead?
I just think that inclusive products, as well as being easier to use for disabled people, are easier to use for everyone. The extreme usability that we need makes it a better product for everyone. It makes it more platform independent. It's easier to, embrace new platforms because you've done things in an inclusive, in a way that means that, you're reflecting best practice and it's not held together by chewing gum and string. So absolutely. And just finally, to plug that panel that you're hosting later on, more of this in much more depth with many more brains involved. But I really have enjoyed picking yours over the last 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Paul.
No, thanks, Robin.